Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we've got a very special guest, and that's Carter from Coin Mastery. How you going, mate?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, and I'm a big fan of yours. And everyone was saying, check out Carter and Coin Mastery. He's level-headed, doesn't shield coins, and all that sort of stuff. So I love your work, and today we're going to talk about your background and startups and cycles and what's going on in the space in general, I guess. So for anyone that hasn't followed your work, what's your background and how did you get into crypto?
Well, the very long story short is that I worked at a startup right at the perfect timing for the global financial crisis. So I got to watch it firsthand. Very small startup in a very small town in a very poor state in the United States, up in a place called Maine. And I had these big dreams, was sold on the stock options, the whole deal, and just watched the floor fall out from underneath the economy. Now, it was interesting because I didn't have any money, so I didn't really it didn't really register to me. I was kind of like, yeah, wow, 600 points today, like, oops. But I didn't have a retirement account or anything. So, but when I started to see everyone get fired, that's when I realized, hey, this is like has serious implications. And between that and realizing that a lot of what was being sold to me, both from the mass media, from my own bosses, from like the college I went to, was not really going to turn out the way I thought it was. This was kind of like, if I didn't take control of this was going to be a problem in a lot of ways. And so I left that job and started my own thing. Problem was, in a small town in a very poor state, there's not a lot of people that want to hire some young kid with no experience and no real idea what he's doing. And I managed to figure out how to start selling websites to local businesses, and that led me into starting some projects on the side. Like, I've always kind of had my eye on things on the side. I started building iPhone apps, or hiring people to build them. Built a couple thousand, hired teams to build these apps, and it got really, really big. Started a website that taught people how to do this. And then that brought me out here to San Francisco, where I really immersed myself into the whole tech thing. It was really starting to take off. This was 2012. And I was starting to see, Uber, people were realizing, hey, this is might be a real company. And Facebook was really starting to take off with advertising. And it was really exciting, really exciting time to be here. And in 2016, I was looking around and being like, all right, this app thing was good, but I was spending a lot of my time trying to convince people that they should do it. Instead of it being, I want to build an app, it was, tell me why I should build an app. And if there's nothing. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got is, if you ever want to ruin your life, spend your time trying to convince people to do things, or try to change other people, or
Yeah.
some phrase of that. And so I started searching around, and I had been buying Bitcoin kind of loosely because Coinbase is right down the street here, and I figured, why not? And met some of those guys, and then I started meeting with people around town, looking for, like, what's the next thing? What's going to keep going big? And I was looking at Amazon businesses, so I started an Amazon business, website, ClickBank, stuff like that. And I kept coming back to crypto, and everyone was like, "Dude, this isn't gonna be a thing. It's like some bunch of hackers." And I ended up helping a guy who had a Satoshi Dice site with his marketing,
Yeah.
and that was the okay. There's something to this, and started buying more Bitcoin, started buying a lot of Ethereum, and then 2017 hit, and all of a sudden I found myself in Facebook groups. I found myself on Telegram, and it was really, really exciting. The problem was, no one was really talking about the stuff I was interested in. I wasn't necessarily interested in uh, getting too deep into the tech. I wasn't too interested in like the technical analysis of the charts. I was interested in what's this all mean? Why is this all happening? And, like, where's it going? And so, I turned on a webcam, started talking to a microphone, and said, listen, I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know much about trading or markets, but I want to find out, and I'm going to document this journey. And that was about a year ago, and here we are.
And that's the idea of coin mastery. Yeah, fantastic.
That's it.
It's so funny that a few of our followers that follow us both were saying, get Carter on. There's so much synergy there. And just from what you said there, I had no interest in money and stocks until the GFC, when my parents gave me some shares for my 21st birthday in 2008. And then I said to Dad, do we have to pay our manager to lose half our money? And he's like, yeah. And I was just like, wow, I need to learn about how this world works. And went down the rabbit hole, watched all those documentaries, and I found, do you know the Tasty Trade guys that talk a lot about options and all that sort of thing? The US.
Yeah, I've seen a few videos of theirs. Yeah.
Yeah, so I watched every video of theirs, and I was like, I can't believe this is how the world of finance and central banking and debt works, and they make it out to sound so hard, but it's pretty easy to understand once you get your head around all these concepts. So very interesting, and that's what convinced me that Bitcoin was always going to work. And then, as you say, no one was interested until Ethereum came along and changed things up a little bit, and you've seen it firsthand there in San Francisco, I guess. So what happened last year from your side of the fence? Because I know in Australia it was speculation, a lot of it, whereas where you are, there's actually the guys building behind the scenes. What did you see in terms of hype, overinvestment? Where's that cycle going now?
Well, on a local level, right? So in San Francisco, what you tend to see is, in my opinion, there's a lot of people last year that were they're putting on they're wrapping up greed in a really pretty wrapper.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, where lots of high level discussions, lots of complex things, and blah blah blah. But I could slice a knife through that conversation just like that when I said, "Hey, I know it's going to pump next week." All of a sudden, like, nobody cared about all the stuff they were talking about 5 minutes ago, and it was just kind of hilarious that, like, just be honest with what you guys are doing here. Like, why are you really trying to put on this front? Now, that being said, I did meet a lot of people that were legit, very engineer-focused hacker, developer types who were building some really amazing stuff. Like some of the guys, on the 0x side of that whole world, and a lot of people in the Ethereum kind of cult around Coinbase and Crypto Castle. That whole world is definitely true believers in it. But when you make 50 million, 100 million bucks, and you're under the age of 30, under the age of 25 sometimes, like, it's very difficult to navigate that when you become these gods, these celebrities. So it was kind of this weird world of popularity, of money, of trying to steer a course of a new direction of a paradigm or whatever, with all of these people that wanted to get in for really the same reason. Like, they wanted to be a piece of that movement, and they also wanted a big piece of that money.
Yeah, even some of the investing groups that started off doing fundamentals and white paper reading, they actually changed their narrative to what is going to pump when it lists. Like, this thing has a sexy website name, and coming from Korea, like, this is going to pump. And that's when you knew that everything was out the window and this was just getting crazy, I think.
That's right. Yeah, I think that it's, I mean, as someone who has a background in health and wellness and everything else, I mean, I always just drill down to what's the common denominator, especially as a marketer. I mean, this is what you learn as a marketer. And dopamine is just, you can't sustain dopamine by talking about the same thing every single day. And as much as I wish I could do daily videos talking about, hey, the price isn't moving that much, or coming up with exciting content about fundamentals and whatever else it may be, it just doesn't release dopamine in viewership. And that is an analogy that you can apply to the entire crypto space. And there's not a whole lot you can do about that, except talking about the exciting pump-related dopamine-driving things. And if you want to keep those levels high, and the price action isn't doing what you want, you need to manufacture that dopamine. You need to do it through artificial excitement. And it comes. I've seen it in 15 different industries. same stuff you see everywhere is just like, it kind of makes you realize, okay, well, this, there's only so much of this that you can really do, until you got to wait for the cycle to kind of reset and move back up.
Oh mate, I could unpack that so much. That whole dopamine statement. It is exactly what happens. And during the bear cycles, when there is no excitement and no dopamine, and the few people that are left watching the YouTube videos, they're probably the ones that are going to benefit. And then when we have this next run in the future, it's the people that have been there during the tough times and learned what's good and what's bad, as you say, 0x and so on, that we get this next wave of people that are going through the dopamine cycle for the first time. And that's what people have seen now in crypto, and it continues. And I think we've got one or two more big cycles left. I don't think we've gone through that .com bubble where there's just, there's nothing left in the future. I think there's way too much happening behind the scenes for this all to turn out to be nothing. But I think people are going to come back to Bitcoin in a lot of ways. And people, as you say, that Ethereum community is very strong. Do you think there's just too much of the next big thing that want to get rich? Oh, I've missed out on Bitcoin. I've missed out on Ethereum. I need to find the next thing. And we might find that the Bitcoin dominance, if they get scaling and Lightning Network, and if Ethereum takes off, they do get the majority of dApps and so on? Or are you being pretty open-minded to what may happen?
When it comes to the next big boom as it relates to price action, I think that whenever, the bubbles really come down to being able to justify valuations that have no business being valued at what they are, because there's no way to compare it, right? So when you look at every bubble, it's really becomes some new thing came, and the people disagree on what the future looks like for that particular thing, and there's no way to compare it to what currently is because it's too new. And that's what drives all bubbles, speculative bubbles, I should say. And I think that crypto definitely has that potential, but it needs a new narrative. It needs a new story to tell. Because if we try to take the same exchanges with the same tokens and go up to 60,000 instead of 19,000, CNBC and everybody who's in the current market is going to look at this and be like, it's the same thing. I've seen it before. There's nothing new here, right? And this past 2017, 2018 cycle, there was so much new. There was all these new exchanges. There was all these new people. There's all this new exposure. If we want it to happen again, which I think it will happen again, it needs a new framework. And what I think that framework will be is how it integrates into profitable companies, or how blockchain companies become profitable, or have like use cases that can be used in a way that is related to money. Yep. And so all of a sudden you start seeing companies, and instead of companies like Square or Overstock that are like using Bitcoin or putting Bitcoin in their name or transacting Bitcoin, they're actually implementing some of these technologies and showing on their SEC filing reports that they're becoming more profitable. And all of a sudden this story becomes, well, it's not just a token, it's the technology. And these companies get a 40% premium when you implement this blockchain technology. Like, look at the numbers. Like, this is insane. And that's kind of what happened with the internet, where people could just say, oh, just you have a retail store, put it online. You're going to get 100 times the users, and it's going to be half as much cost to operate. And you can just ship it out your front door, and all of a sudden your business triples.
It's kind of what we saw in Japan as well last year that really ignited things when those countries that accepted Bitcoin started to see an increase in business, as you say. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and I think that, so it'll be a lot of the same stuff. It'll be a lot of the same technologies, potentially the same way the tokens are done. Might see things like security tokens integrate their way into there, but it'll all be the same type of deal. But it has to be a new story.
Yeah,
there has to be a new valuation metric that all of a sudden the people that are skeptical now at the top are like, I can't really argue with that. I could argue with a token that was just an idea, but I can't argue with money. I can't argue with profits.
Yeah.
So I think that gets we start seeing that, you're going to start to see a lot of things start to happen.
I completely agree. Like, if we're going to have another alt season, alt run that everyone loves, it can't be the narrative last time of white papers and ideas. And people aren't just going to pump more money in through Binance. And I completely agree that it has to be right. That one has got a working project. They've launched their app. There's real demand for that token, and that can spur more future speculation. Even if the actual use case and users and all that is coming off a low base, at least they've got a new story. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think a great like test, I guess, is when you go on wherever people are hanging out, right? Maybe they're on Reddit or Telegram or Twitter or wherever their community is. Right now, anytime, like even today, like you see price action move up, you see an overwhelming number of people that are like, "Oh, this is exciting. Here's where I'm taking my profits. I don't want, I've been down this road before." Right? For good reason, whatever. At some point, there's going to be a new story that causes people to say, you know what, I'm going to let this ride because insert reason.
Yes.
And when you start hearing people say that, that's when you know
and I think
it's on.
I think that'll reflect in the charts. We won't have that parabolic. We'll have people that are getting out at break even, so it's going to be a less steep curve. And then, as you say, we saw it last year when people got burnt when they bought Ethereum at 400 and it fell back to 100, and then they got out at 400, and then they're back in once it's at 600, chasing it again. So it's all human psychology. But the next thing I wanted to ask you about was the macro side of things. And I remember someone once saying that money wants to find a home, and money will flow to where it's treated best. And there's been so much money printed trying to spur economic growth, or however you want to break that down. A low yield world, where do you think this all sort of ties in?
Well, I think it's really hard to know how this is going to play out in that sense, because crypto, specifically Bitcoin, it's just so small, right? You talk to, whether it be a hedge fund manager or a professional trading desk or anyone who's got money, like they're moving a lot of money. I mean, it's like, okay, let's do a $50-100 million trade or something like that. You just can't do that in the cryptocurrency world right now. I mean, you can mess around with Bitcoin futures, things like that, but it's very difficult. And so I think that we don't really know quite yet. But eventually, one thing that came out of the global financial crisis, for better or for worse, is that it really solidified this idea that the finance industry will never stop creating new ways to create things that people can buy and own. Synthetic products that is the name of the game. It started in 1982, and it's going to keep going for probably the next 50, 100 years. And I think that cryptocurrency adds a very, very compelling way to create new products. Now, it could be an ETF, or it could be like a collateralized loan that's using blockchain or using crypto assets, or maybe it's a way to securitize artwork and collectibles and whatever else it may be. But I have no doubt in my mind that at some point, as the world becomes this passive income driven index fund where everybody's getting 4%, the banks are going to come out and say, we need to create some things that we can sell that are getting 8% or 10%. And even if we got to make this stuff up, we're going to make it up. And I think crypto and that tokenization process offers that. How that plays out, I'm not sure. I think Bitcoin's probably going to be the best first test of it, purely as an asset, like a traded asset that gets liquid enough where it resolves itself on a price, especially as you see all these CFTC reports and the exchange integrity and all that sort of thing. But I think then you'll see just assets, be tokenized and then be traded on an exchange somewhere and have a liquidity premium to them. And that becomes an asset class. Because then you can literally take anything you want wrap it into a product and sell that product as an ETF, as a mutual fund. I mean, as a default. So I mean, you could trade whatever you want. Like, oh, I'm doing a car, a vintage car security product, and it's easy to do because it's all tokenized, and so you can measure it, trade it, have the price, market value, everything.
Don't joke about that. There's an ICO in Australia called Bitcar that are tokenizing collectible cars, and the sales pitch.
There you go.
The sales pitch is that collectible cars have actually outperformed stock markets during turndowns, and they sort of hold their value, the rare Porsches and stuff. So they're tokenizing that. So crazy.
Yeah. I mean, like those ideas. I think as the industry, as the technology, and as the regulation, as it all works itself out, like it sounds crazy. I mean, it doesn't sound crazy. It's just kind of like it's kind of not inefficient or kind of out there, I guess. But I think in 10 years it'll make complete sense that you can put a value on anything and package it up into any like asset you want, and that has a market value that gets a certain return every year, it gets a certain yield every year, and certain companies do this really well, and like that's where kind of the new returns come from.
That's some of the sales pitches we're seeing in Australia. Resource-rich country, heaps of land, real estate, in-ground minerals. People are working out, right, how do we tokenize that and make it more liquid, I guess. So it's going to be interesting to watch all that play out. Any final thoughts, mate, about where we are at the moment and, what you see behind the scenes in San Francisco compared to what we see here in Australia?
I think there's a great blog post I read recently about kind of the two stories of crypto. It's like Bitcoin basically and Ethereum, and the finance versus tech, not versus, but that's kind of the two paths that's gone down. And I think that's what you're going to see is a divergence of the finance world, who just wants tradable assets that they can make money off of, and then you see the tech, which builds new technologies as it relates to whether it be asset generation, whether it be efficiency, whatever. And you're going to see those split, and you're going to see a very clear divide in the crypto community on which way they go, which parts of that excite them in many ways, and that's not a bad thing. That's just crypto's too big of an idea for it to stay all as one thing. So I think we're going to see that happen. And I think as we see that happen, for anybody listening or watching, if you're interested in the money side, you probably want to follow that storyline, right? Like you want to follow the Bitcoin and the trading desks and the ETFs of the world. Like you want to go that way. If you're interested in blockchain being implemented into businesses and making the world differently, kind of tokenizing the whole world, you should follow that train. But eventually it's very difficult to try to intermix these two, especially kind of as an investor or as a trader, so to speak. But I'm very, very bullish on the whole idea of all of it because kind of like what we were talking about earlier, the world is not headed in a place where like, oh, well, we'll just create, like there's more companies or there's more assets we can have, or there's more wealth out there. There's more value. Like that value needs to be manufactured somewhere. And cryptocurrencies, blockchains, distributed ledgers, all of it provides the ability to create all of that stuff. And that is a very, very, very big need that people who are market makers, for a lot of banks and people on the front side of this, they know that that's that's what they need to be doing. And that's why they're looking at this sort of technology. How that plays out for the average person in terms of, getting a return on your investment or working on a project you're really interested in, we'll see, right? We just don't know with regulation and markets and how that all works out. But it's very, very exciting. I can tell you, San Francisco, it's still the engineering and the development is out of control. How many people, how much horsepower is being put into this stuff. It's just that split has not happened yet. It's still all in one big bucket, and that causes a lot of confusion, causes a lot of investor confusion and all that sort of thing.
I think that what makes me so confident. It's just the smartest minds and people. We spoke to a recruiting agency yesterday. They're pulling people from Google and Facebook and that to come work on crypto projects, from the banks to work on Bitcoin and the underlying infrastructure. So that's what makes me so bullish. So thanks so much for joining us today, mate. I hope we speak again in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers, guys.